I'd like to begin my comments, interestingly enough, by a reading one verse of Genesis. And it's Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. The earth was formless, void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. We all know that as the creation narrative. And in that one verse, there are 4 technical words for chaos. And those words in English are formless, void, darkness, and deep. Deep meaning the deep water. And it's all chaotic. Now, if you go through the entire Old Testament, you will discover that the only person who can control chaotic water is God. And that word for, particularly the word for deep, tahum, which means the chaotic water, the only one who can control it is God. And pardon the pun, but chaotic water flows all the way through the Old Testament. We get into the New Testament, which of course is Greek, not Hebrew. And there the word is thalassos, which again means chaotic water, or can mean chaotic water. It is not exclusive to Jesus, but it is there. Now, if you look at the entire Old and New Testament, the entire Bible, you will discover that in a certain sense, the story begins with chaotic water. And in Revelation chapter 21, it ends with chaotic water. Chapter 21, the text is, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The old heaven and the old earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." So the notion of sea always has a dimension of chaos, and not just a forceful water sea. It means cosmic chaos. And the story that we have for Sunday's gospel, for tomorrow's gospel, is one of the stories where we have this chaotic water, cosmic chaotic water, and Jesus is the only one who can control it. And the word sea is found in this particular text. During the 4th watch of the night, he came toward them walking on the sea. The issue is not that Jesus has power to walk on water. The issue is much deeper than that. The issue is that Jesus has control of cosmic chaos. The text goes on. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. So we've got to understand this particular story on a very deep level, on the level of cosmic chaos. And it is interesting, and this is Matthew's gospel. As we go a little further, they said it is a ghost, and Jesus said, "It is I." That's that famous ego in me, I am verse that we find frequently in John's gospel, but we have it here as well, which at least in the imagination, the religious imagination of Christians, it is self-revelatory. Jesus says, ego eimi. Jesus says, I am. And frequently the text goes back to the story when Moses asks for God's name. And the answer that we have in an Exodus is a form of the verb to be. Now, some say it is I am who I am. Others, it translated in the future, I will be who I will be. But actually, the verb, the form that we find in Exodus is an unfamiliar form. There's no other place in the scriptures or in other documents that we find a translation. I facetiously think that what we have there is when Moses says, "What is your name?" and God says, "None of your business." Because giving of one's name in the traditional society is very personal. It is self-revelatory. So all of this is a very, very deep story. And we cheat ourselves of the depth of the meaning of the story if we only read it on the level of the story, which it makes it a good story. It's still a very good story. But there are elements here that the Jewish community, and of course the early Christians were Jewish in origin. These are words very much, like some of the words that are so important to us in our Christian tradition, profound theological meaning. So again, we are dealing with something that is cosmic. It's not simply, don't be afraid, it's me, I'm not a ghost. It's more than that. It is, I am, don't be afraid. So now what do we have here in this story on a cosmic level? On a cosmic level, what we have is, as we find in ancient creation stories in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia, not in Egypt, the character of the creation stories is frequently determined by the experience of the people of that place and time, their experience of water. So Mesopotamia, now we know it, it's the land between the rivers. That's what Mesopotamia means. Mesopotamia is a generic term. It's not the term of an ethnic group. It's a generic term, and it means land between the two rivers. And the rivers we know are the Tigris and the Euphrates. We see them often on the news when they're talking about Iraq, when they're talking about Iraq. So we've got the land between two rivers. I spent 4 years in St. Louis, Missouri, where the Mississippi meets the Missouri River. With all of our technology, when those rivers flood, we cannot control the water. So think about it, without the kind of engineering control that we have, how flooding the Tigris and the Euphrates, how that must have frightened the people. No wonder that chaotic waters always threatened existence. And that we must remember. These waters in the story threaten existence. In the ancient world, creation occurred after the good God and the evil God were in a cosmic battle for not only superiority, but for defeat and extinction of the foe. Now, what ancient Israel did was reinterpret the story, but God has no foe. God has no competitor. So all we have is God putting order in the cosmic waters. And then it's like Jesus would speak a word and the waters would be calm again. The text doesn't exactly say that. But once again, they would know these ancient stories. So in the ancient world, then, what you have is this cosmic fight between good and evil. That is something we all know. We all know the fight between good and evil. We know that in our own selves. We know that in the church. Sometimes the church fighting the government or social systems. Sometimes the church fighting another dimension of the church. We certainly see something. I mean, what's going on in our Congress? What's going on where there's assassinations all over the world? What is going on in our world? Some people think we are going through a second axial age. And I also heard somebody say that we are entering, and we have entered a long time ago, into another age of extinction. And there's no guarantee that our species will survive that age of extinction. However you want to understand this or take a side, and that is not a conspiracy kind of what's the word that I want? Frightening, to frighten the people. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is in many ways factual if you know anything about cosmology, or if you know anything about the development and the deconstruction of society. So however we want to understand it, this story on one level tells about chaotic waters that can destroy It could destroy Peter. It could destroy any of the disciples who were in the boat. It did not destroy or threaten Jesus. And the reason was because he is the cosmic creative God. So think about some experience in your life right now, whether that be personal. I mean, sometimes people who must face death-dealing illness, and there is no option of recovery. They may feel that they are really fighting cosmic forces because they are. So either in the individual life, some communities are dying out. My congregation, you don't use that word. You don't use the word die. You don't even use the word in some circles, completion. It's just too frightening. It's the end of something that should never end in the minds of some people. But they're really suffering from cosmic turmoil in a very real sense. And maybe some of you are as well. So individual or immediate congregation, or in the United States or in the world, there is the threat of destruction. And let's have the sea being the symbol of that destruction. It can swallow us up. But the story tells us that Jesus says, don't be afraid, fear not. How many times we find in both testaments, preceding or at the beginning of an experience of divine visitation, the first words are, fear not. That's in the Annunciation. I mean, it's all over. Fear not. And why not? Because I am here to protect you. That's what God says. That's what Jesus says. Ego and me. It is I. And then we have Peter saying, if it's really you, always just in case, a little hanging on there, just in case. If it's really you, let me come to you. And Jesus said, come, and he went. And as long as he trusted that God in Jesus, that Jesus had power over cosmic destruction, as long as he trusted, he was fine. That as soon as he doubted, and what does this say? He became frightened, but when he saw how strong the wind was, when we see how strong the opposition is, how death-dealing life can be sometimes, then the question is, do we really trust? This is the story about trust. Trust in the midst of unbelievable suffering, unbelievable threat. Do we really trust? We say it, we mean it, but usually we have nothing concrete to hang on to. In a certain sense, Peter didn't either. He didn't have Jesus to hang on to, nothing concrete. And that's so often what happens in life. We have nothing concrete. I don't know about you, but I don't even want to say often. I'm waiting, for the heavens to open up and some kind of light to come down and strike me so that I will experience the presence of God. It's a question of believing in the promises that have been made and trusting that God is faithful to those promises. In a very real sense, that's the story of life as we live it. So as we look at this particular story, what we see and what the disciples say, the Son of God, using the metaphor of cosmic chaos, I would say you are in charge of, you have the power of the Creator God. Not that you're in charge of the Creator God, but you're in charge of all creation and have the power of the Creator God. That's what we have in a very real sense. There's a dimension to this story that has to do with creation. And notice, cosmic chaos is with us until the end. It will only be at the real end, the new heaven and the new earth. And the old heaven and the old earth have passed away, and the sea is no more. Then and only then will we not be bombarded by that which we think can destroy us. Sometimes it might be able. Peter could have drowned. Other times it's bigger than we think it is, but you never know it for sure when you are in the throes of it. So if you're walking on the water, don't step out unless you are sure of your own trust in God, which is a strange expression, I presume. But in a very real sense, that's what we have in this particular story. Faith tells us, because God has made promises, God may let us feel like we're sinking, but we will never drown. We will never drown. Now, that's an expression of faith. That's as much an expression of faith as I believe in God the Father Almighty. I will never drown. I will never be destroyed. I will be battered. I will be bloody. I will feel terrible anxiety, but I will never be destroyed. That's what a story like this invites us to say. And always remember, we will never be destroyed, because he will always reach out his hand and say, come. So we must, I'll say again, believe in the promises that God has made and trust that God will be faithful to those promises. Amen.